The moment my husband laughed and said I couldn't even afford to buy a car, something inside me shattered like glass hitting concrete. But here's the thing about being underestimated your entire life. You learn to smile through the pain, and you learn to plan. Hey everyone, I want you to comment below and tell me where you're watching this from, because what I'm about to share with you happened in small-town Georgia, but I have a feeling this story is going to resonate with people all over the world. If you've ever been married to someone who made you feel small, if you've ever had in-laws who treated you like you weren't good enough, or if you've ever been so hurt that you planned the most satisfying revenge of your life, this story is for you. My name is Sarah, and 3 years ago, I was sitting in my mother-in-law's perfectly manicured living room, surrounded by my husband's family, feeling like the biggest disappointment that ever walked through their door. I was 34 years old, married to David for 8 years, and according to everyone in that room, I was the reason their golden boy wasn't living up to his potential. The Hendersons had money. Old money, new money, and every kind of money in between. David's father, Robert, owned 3 car dealerships across Georgia. His mother, Patricia, came from a family that had been in textiles for generations. David's older brother, Michael, was a successful investment banker in Atlanta. Even David's younger sister, Jennifer, had married a doctor and lived in a mansion in Buckhead. And then there was me. Sarah Mitchell, well, Sarah Henderson now, though that name had never felt quite right rolling off my tongue. I grew up in a trailer park 20 minutes outside of town. My mom worked double shifts at the diner, and my dad wasn't around much after I turned 12. I'd put myself through community college working nights at a gas station, and I'd been working as a bookkeeper at a small accounting firm when I met David. But here's what none of them knew. What I'd been hiding for 8 long years. I wasn't just good with numbers. I was brilliant with them. And while they'd been treating me like their charity case, I'd been building something they couldn't even imagine. The family meeting that changed everything started like they all did. Patricia served her famous peach cobbler, Robert poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon, and everyone gathered around to discuss David's situation. His situation being that he'd been fired from his job at his father's dealership for the 3rd time in 2 years, and this time, Robert wasn't going to bail him out. I just don't understand how this keeps happening, Patricia said, her voice dripping with that particular brand of southern disappointment that could cut glass. She was looking at me when she said it, like somehow David's inability to show up to work on time was my fault. Maybe he needs more support at home, Jennifer chimed in, giving me a look that could freeze hell over. You know, someone who really understands what it means to build a career. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Jennifer had never worked a day in her life. Her idea of building a career was marrying her college boyfriend the day after graduation. David was slouched in his chair, looking everywhere except at me. This was his pattern. Let his family tear me apart while he sat there like a spectator at his own life. I'd stopped expecting him to defend me years ago, but it still stung every single time. Well, Robert said, setting down his glass with that authoritative thunk that meant he was about to deliver a verdict, David's going to have to figure this out on his own this time. Maybe getting married so young wasn't the wisest choice. The room went quiet except for the tick of Patricia's grandfather clock. 27 years that clock had been marking time in this house, and I'd been sitting in this same spot, listening to these same conversations, for nearly a third of those years. I mean, let's be honest, Patricia continued, her voice getting that sing-song quality it took on when she was about to deliver what she thought was a gentle truth. Sarah's a sweet girl, but she doesn't exactly bring anything to the table, does she? My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against my thighs under the coffee table, hoping nobody would notice. Sweet girl. That's what I'd been reduced to after 8 years of marriage, after 8 years of holidays and birthdays and family dinners where I sat quietly and smiled and pretended their words didn't slice through me like razor blades. She can't even afford to buy a car, David said suddenly, and he was laughing. Actually laughing. Sarah takes the bus everywhere. Can you imagine? My wife takes public transportation. The laughter that followed felt like being dunked in ice water. Michael was chuckling, shaking his head like he couldn't believe his brother had married such a pathetic creature. Jennifer was smirking behind her wine glass. Robert was just staring at me with this expression of complete disgust, like I was something he'd found stuck to the bottom of his shoe. But it was Patricia's laugh that broke me. high and light and utterly delighted, like she'd just heard the funniest joke of her life. "Oh, David," she gasped between giggles. "That's terrible. But honestly, what did you expect?" That's when I felt it. Not heartbreak, I was long past heartbreak. This was something colder, sharper, more focused. This was rage crystallizing into purpose. 8 years of their condescension, 8 years of their assumptions, 8 years of pretending to be grateful for their tolerance, and this was how they saw me. Poor little Sarah, who couldn't even buy herself a car. If you've ever been in a moment where you realized that the people who were supposed to love you had been laughing at you behind your back, you know the feeling I'm talking about. It's like falling through the floor of your own life. And if you're watching this and you know that feeling, please hit that subscribe button right now, because you're going to want to see how this story ends. I stood up slowly, my legs somehow steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "I think I'm going to step outside for some air," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "Of course, dear," Patricia said, waving her hand dismissively. "Take your time." I walked through their marble foyer, past the crystal chandelier that cost more than most people make in a year, past the family portraits where I was notably absent from most of them, and out into the thick Georgia evening. The air was heavy with honeysuckle and the promise of rain. I stood on their wraparound porch, looking out at Robert's perfectly maintained lawn, and I made a decision that would change everything. I pulled out my phone, not the cheap Android they thought was all I could afford, but my actual phone, the one I'd kept hidden for 3 years, and I made a call. "Marcus, it's Sarah. I need you to move the timeline up. Tomorrow." Yes, I know what I said before, but plans change. The man on the other end of the line was quiet for a moment. Marcus Webb had been my business partner and closest friend since college, the only person who knew the truth about what I'd been building while my husband's family treated me like their resident charity case. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "Once we do this, there's no going back." I could hear David's laughter drifting through the open windows, could hear Patricia saying something about managing expectations and being realistic about one's place in life. "I'm sure," I said. "And Marcus, make sure the helicopter lands right in the middle of their family barbecue tomorrow. I want them to see everything." As I hung up the phone, I realized I was smiling for the first time in months. Not the polite, careful smile I wore in their presence, but something genuine and fierce and completely my own. Tomorrow, the Hendersons were going to learn that they'd been laughing at the wrong person. Tomorrow, they were going to discover that their son hadn't married beneath him. He'd married so far above his league that he'd never even seen the playing field I was on. And tomorrow, when my Ferrari landed in their backyard, they were going to understand that some jokes have consequences. The morning of what I'd privately started calling the reckoning, I woke up at 5 a.m. like I had every day for the past 3 years. David was snoring beside me, dead to the world after drinking his way through his family's humiliation the night before. I slipped out of bed quietly, pulled on my running clothes, and headed out into the pre-dawn darkness. This was my sacred time, the 2 hours before the world woke up when I could finally be myself. While David thought I was just another suburban housewife going for a morning jog, I was actually running the most successful cryptocurrency trading firm in the Southeast. But let me back up, because I need you to understand how I got here. How a girl from a trailer park ended up building a multi-million-dollar business while her husband and his family thought she couldn't afford a car. It started 8 years ago, during the last semester of my accounting degree. I was working nights at a 24-hour gas station, surviving on coffee and determination, when I met David Henderson at a campus party I had no business attending. He was gorgeous in that effortless way that only comes with good genes and better dental care, and he was slumming it with the community college kids because his fraternity had run out of beer. I was tired, working my 3rd job to pay for textbooks, when this golden boy walked up to me and started asking about my major like he actually cared what I had to say. For a girl who'd spent her entire life being invisible, it felt like being seen by the sun. David wasn't like the guys I'd grown up around. He talked about traveling to Europe, about wine that cost more than my rent, about a future that sparkled with possibilities I'd never dared to imagine. When he asked me out, I said yes before I could think about all the reasons I should say no. Those first 6 months were magic. David picked me up in his BMW, took me to restaurants where the waiters knew his name, introduced me to a world where people didn't count change before ordering dessert. He made me feel beautiful, special, like I was worth something more than the sum of my circumstances. What I didn't realize at the time was that I was his rebellion. David Henderson, the golden boy who'd never had to work for anything in his life, was dating the poor girl from the trailer park because it made him feel edgy and authentic. I was his walk on the wild side, his proof that he wasn't just another spoiled rich kid. And I was so grateful for his attention, so desperate to belong somewhere, that I missed all the warning signs. Like how he never took me to family gatherings during those first months. Or how he'd always change the subject when I talked about my goals and dreams. Or how he seemed to think my financial struggles were charming rather than devastating. "You're so real," he used to say, like being poor was a personality trait I'd chosen for his entertainment. But I was in love, the kind of desperate, all-consuming love that only happens when someone offers you a life you never thought you could have. When David proposed after 2 years of dating, I said yes without hesitation. I thought I was marrying into a fairy tale. The problem started immediately after the wedding. Suddenly, David's family wasn't charmed by my authenticity anymore. Patricia made it clear that she'd expected this little phase of her son's life to run its course before things got serious. Robert started making comments about knowing one's place and realistic expectations. And David just let it happen. Worse, he started joining in. It was like watching the man I'd married transform into someone I didn't recognize. He stopped defending me, stopped seeing me as anything more than an embarrassment he was stuck with. I went from being his real girl to being his burden in the space of a few months. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you power that nobody sees coming. While David was struggling to hold down a job at his father's dealership, while his family was making jokes about my thrift store clothes and public transportation, I was discovering something about myself that changed everything. I was brilliant with numbers. Not just good, brilliant. It started with our household budget. David had no idea how to manage money despite growing up with plenty of it, so I took over our finances. Within 6 months, I'd reorganized our spending, negotiated better rates on everything from insurance to utilities, and built us an emergency fund that David didn't even know existed. But late at night, when David was passed out from another evening of drinking away his disappointments, I started playing with something more interesting than household budgets. I started studying cryptocurrency. This was 2018, back when most people still thought Bitcoin was internet funny money. But I saw patterns in the chaos, opportunities in the volatility that my accounting background helped me recognize. I started with $50, money I scraped together from returning bottles and selling clothes I'd outgrown. Within 3 months, I turned that $50 into $500. Within 6 months, it was $5,000. By our first anniversary, I had $20,000 in crypto assets that David didn't know existed. I should have told him. A good wife would have shared this success with her husband. But David had made it clear that my opinions about money weren't welcome in his family. When I tried to suggest better investment strategies for his trust fund, he'd laughed and told me to stick to what I knew. So I did stick to what I knew. And what I knew was making me richer every single day. Marcus Webb entered my life during year 2 of my marriage, when I was looking for someone to help me legitimize my trading operation. He was a tech genius from MIT who dropped out of his PhD program to focus on blockchain development. More importantly, he was the first person who looked at my trading algorithms and said "holy shit" instead of "that's nice, dear." We started as business partners and became best friends. Marcus helped me set up the technical infrastructure for what would become Webb Mitchell Crypto Solutions, while I provided the analytical genius that turned market chaos into consistent profit. The beautiful irony was that while David's family thought I was too stupid to contribute anything meaningful to their son's life, I was building a company that would eventually manage over $300 million in crypto assets for clients across 3 states. But I kept it secret. All of it. I maintained 2 complete lives. The public one where I was poor Sarah who took the bus and shopped at discount stores, and the private one where I was Sarah Mitchell, co-founder and CEO of one of the most successful crypto trading firms in the Southeast. The deception required careful planning. I kept my business phone and laptop in a storage unit across town. I conducted all my meetings during my supposed job hunting hours. I had Marcus handle all client communications so my name never appeared in any public documentation. To everyone else, I was unemployed and unemployable. To my clients, I was the anonymous genius who could turn market volatility into consistent 8-figure returns. And every morning, I'd wake up at 5 a.m., slip into my running clothes, and spend 2 hours managing a business empire that would have made Robert Henderson's car dealerships look like lemonade stands. The hardest part wasn't the secrecy, it was watching David struggle while knowing I could solve all his problems with a single phone call. But every time he dismissed my opinions, every time his family made jokes about my inadequacy, I felt more justified in keeping my success to myself. Besides, I told myself, this was my insurance policy. If the marriage fell apart, if David's family finally succeeded in convincing him to leave me, I'd be fine. More than fine, I'd be free. What I didn't realize was how much anger I was storing up, how much resentment I was building toward the people who claimed to love me while treating me like garbage. That morning, as I sat in my storage unit responding to messages from clients who trusted me with millions of dollars, I made the final preparations for what was about to happen. In 12 hours, David's family would be gathering for their monthly barbecue. In 12 hours, they'd make jokes about poor Sarah and her public transportation. And in 12 hours, everything they thought they knew about their lives would change forever. If you've ever been married to someone who made you feel small, if you've ever hidden parts of yourself to avoid conflict, you know why I made the choices I made. And if you're relating to this story, please share it with someone who needs to hear it, because what happens next is going to blow your mind. Sunday barbecues at the Henderson house were a monthly tradition that I'd endured for 8 years, and they followed the same script every single time. Patricia would spend days preparing her famous potato salad and acting like she was hosting the governor. Robert would fire up his expensive grill and hold court about business and politics. Michael would show up with his latest girlfriend and make subtle jokes about people who hadn't quite found their footing yet. Jennifer would arrive fashionably late with her doctor husband and their perfectly dressed children, ready to perform the role of the successful daughter. And I would smile and nod and pretend their barbs didn't land, while David drank beer and acted like he couldn't hear the constant stream of insults disguised as concern. But this Sunday was going to be different. This Sunday, I was going to watch their entire worldview collapse in real time. I spent extra time getting ready that morning, choosing my outfit with the care of a general preparing for battle. I picked the dress they'd seen me wear a dozen times before, a simple blue sundress from Target that Patricia had once described as practical. I wore the cheap sandals that Jennifer had made a point of noticing last month. I carried the worn purse that had been a Christmas gift from my mother 3 years ago. I wanted to look exactly like what they expected. Poor Sarah, trying her best but never quite measuring up. David was hungover and cranky, moving around our small apartment like a bear with a sore paw. We lived in a 2-bedroom rental on the wrong side of town, not because we couldn't afford better, but because David had insisted on maintaining the image that we were struggling. It was important to his narrative that I was the reason he couldn't succeed. "Do we have to go to this thing?" he muttered, squinting at the coffee maker like it had personally offended him. "Your mother expects us," I said, the same response I'd given for 8 years. What I didn't say was that I'd been looking forward to this particular barbecue for weeks. Everything was in place. Marcus had confirmed the delivery. The timing was perfect. All I had to do was sit back and watch. The drive to his parents' house was quiet except for David's occasional groans and the sound of classic rock from the radio. We took his beat-up Honda Civic, the car his parents had bought him in high school that he'd never bothered to replace. It was another prop in the story of his life, evidence that he was barely scraping by thanks to his deadweight wife. The Henderson estate sat on 15 acres outside of town, a sprawling colonial with white columns and perfectly manicured gardens that looked like something from a magazine. The circular driveway could hold a dozen cars, and Robert's collection of classic vehicles was displayed in a separate garage that was bigger than most people's houses. As we pulled up, I could see the family was already gathering in the backyard. Michael's Porsche was parked near the front door. Jennifer's husband's Mercedes was gleaming in the afternoon sun. Even the catering staff Patricia hired for these casual family gatherings had nicer cars than the one David and I arrived in. "Remember," David said as we got out of the car, "just try to fit in, okay?" Don't bring up your job hunting or any of that stuff. It makes everyone uncomfortable. I nodded like I always did, but inside I was counting down the minutes until showtime. The backyard was Patricia's pride and joy, an acre of perfectly maintained lawn surrounded by flower gardens that required a team of landscapers to maintain. There was a pool with a waterfall feature, a tennis court, and a gazebo where they held outdoor dinner parties for their country club friends. Everyone was already deep into their assigned roles when we walked through the gate. Robert was manning his professional-grade grill, wearing an apron that read King of the Castle in gold embroidery. Patricia was arranging flowers in crystal vases, directing the catering staff with the authority of someone who'd never served herself a meal in her life. Michael was lounging in a deck chair, checking his phone and making important sounding calls about investment opportunities. Jennifer was holding court near the pool, her twin boys playing in the shallow end while she explained to anyone within earshot how challenging it was to find good help these days. "Sarah! David!" Patricia called out in that bright, artificial voice she used when she wanted to sound welcoming. "Come get some drinks." The bar was set up under a white tent, complete with a professional bartender who knew everyone's preferred cocktails by heart. I asked for sweet tea, the same thing I ordered every month, while David got his usual beer. "How's the job search going, Sarah?" Michael asked, appearing beside me with that smirk that never quite left his face. "Find anything promising?" It was the same question he asked every month, and we both knew he wasn't asking because he cared. Michael enjoyed reminding everyone that his sister-in-law couldn't find work, that she was just another mouth for David to feed on his inconsistent income. "Still looking," I said with the same smile I'd perfected over the years. "You know how the market is." "Ham," he nodded, like my unemployment was a personal failing rather than a choice. "Well, I'm sure something will turn up eventually. Maybe retail? I know they're always hiring at the mall." The condescension in his voice was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Here was a man who'd inherited his position at his investment firm, who'd never worked a real job in his life, suggesting that retail work was the ceiling of my aspirations. "Actually," David chimed in, joining our conversation with his beer already half empty, "Sarah's been thinking about going back to school. Maybe getting her real estate license or something." I felt my jaw clench. We'd never discussed real estate, and David knew perfectly well that I already had a college degree. But this was part of his ongoing narrative, that I needed more education, more training, more something before I could be useful. Real estate. Patricia had somehow materialized beside us, her radar for gossip pulling her into our conversation. "What a wonderful idea. Jennifer's friend Melody does real estate, and she says it's perfect for women who want to feel like they're contributing without too much pressure." Contributing without too much pressure. Like I was a child who needed to be given busy work to feel important. "I think Sarah would be great at showing houses," Jennifer added, drifting over with her wine glass and her perfect smile. "She's so good at making the best of limited situations." The insults were flowing like water now, each one delivered with such sweet southern charm that anyone watching might think they were being supportive. But I heard what they weren't saying, that I needed to know my place, that the best I could hope for was a job that wouldn't threaten their son and brother's fragile ego. "Well," Robert said, joining our little circle with his spatula in hand, "the important thing is having realistic expectations. Not everyone is cut out for high-pressure careers. Not everyone is cut out for high-pressure careers." This from a man whose idea of high pressure was deciding which of his 3 dealerships to visit on any given day. "Absolutely," David agreed, and I felt something inside me turn to ice. Sarah's always been more of a support system kind of person. Behind the scenes, you know. Behind the scenes. 8 years of marriage, and that's how my husband saw me. Not as a partner, not as someone with my own dreams and ambitions, but as background support for his starring role. I excused myself to use the bathroom, but really I needed a moment to breathe. The powder room off the main hallway was decorated with Patricia's collection of antique mirrors and fresh flowers. I looked at my reflection and saw exactly what they saw, a woman in a cheap dress with discount store shoes, someone who didn't belong in their world of crystal and gold. But I also saw something else. I saw the CEO of a multimillion-dollar company. I saw someone who'd built an empire while they thought she was barely surviving. I saw a woman who was about to rewrite every assumption they'd ever made about her worth. I checked my phone. Marcus had sent a single text, ETA 15 minutes. 15 minutes until their world changed forever. I walked back outside, where the conversation had moved on to Michael's latest acquisition. Apparently he'd bought a vacation home in Hilton Head, and I took my place in their circle like I always did. The invisible woman, the family disappointment, the wife who couldn't even afford her own car. But this time, when David made another joke about my financial situation, when Patricia made another comment about managing expectations, when they all laughed at my expense, I just smiled and checked my watch. 12 minutes to go. And then, right on schedule, I heard it. The distant sound of helicopter rotors cutting through the afternoon air, getting closer by the second. The helicopter appeared over the tree line at exactly 2:47 p.m., and the first person to notice was 6-year-old Tyler, Jennifer's youngest son. He pointed at the sky and started jumping up and down, shouting something about a flying machine that was quickly drowned out by the growing thunder of rotor blades. Everyone looked up at once, shading their eyes against the afternoon sun as a sleek black helicopter circled the Henderson property once, then twice, before beginning its descent toward the center of the backyard. "What in the hell?" Robert shouted over the noise, his spatula still in his hand as he watched his perfectly manicured lawn become an impromptu landing pad. The helicopter was beautiful, a Robinson R66 with gold accents that caught the sunlight like jewelry. But it was what was hanging beneath it that made Patricia scream and drop her crystal wine glass. Suspended from a cargo hook was a cherry-red Ferrari 488 GTB, spinning slowly in the downdraft as the helicopter maneuvered it toward the ground with surgical precision. The noise was incredible. Every conversation stopped, every phone came out to record, and every person in that backyard stood frozen as the most expensive car delivery in Georgia history took place on the Henderson family lawn. I felt strangely calm watching the chaos unfold around me. This was the moment I'd been planning for months, the revelation that would finally show them exactly who they'd been dismissing all these years. David was staring at the helicopter like it was an alien spacecraft. "What the hell is happening?" he yelled to nobody in particular. The catering staff had stopped what they were doing to gawk. Michael was holding his phone up, recording everything with his mouth hanging open. Jennifer had grabbed her children and was backing toward the house like the helicopter might explode. But it was Patricia's face that I'll remember forever. She was standing there in her perfectly coordinated outfit, watching a $250,000 sports car being lowered onto her pristine lawn, and she looked like someone had just told her the world was ending. The helicopter touched down gently, setting the Ferrari on the grass with the kind of precision that only comes from working with the best pilots money can buy. The cargo hook disengaged, and the aircraft lifted off immediately, circling once more before heading back toward the horizon. The sudden silence was almost as jarring as the noise had been. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They all just stood there staring at the cherry-red Ferrari sitting in the middle of their backyard barbecue like it had materialized from another dimension. "Whose car is that?" Robert finally asked, his voice strangely quiet. I took a deep breath and walked toward the Ferrari, pulling the key fob from my purse, the same worn purse they'd been judging all afternoon. The car's lights flashed and the engine purred to life with a sound that made everyone jump. "Mine," I said simply. The word hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. David was the first to react. He started laughing, not the cruel laughter from the night before, but confused, disbelieving laughter. "Very funny, Sarah. Whose car is it really?" I walked around to the driver's side of the Ferrari, my cheap Target sandals looking absurd against the Italian engineering, and opened the door. The interior was exactly as I'd specified. Black leather with red stitching, carbon fiber accents, and the intoxicating smell of luxury that only comes with a car that costs more than most people's houses. "It's mine," I repeated, settling into the driver's seat like I'd been doing it my whole life. The silence that followed was the kind you hear before thunder, when the whole world holds its breath waiting for the storm to break. Patricia was the first to find her voice. "Sarah, sweetheart, I don't understand. How could you possibly?" "Can't even afford to buy a car," I interrupted, looking directly at David. "Isn't that what you said last night? That your wife can't even afford to buy a car?" David's face went white. He was starting to understand that this wasn't a joke, wasn't some elaborate prank or misunderstanding. "Sarah, where did this come from? How did you—" "My ride's here," I said, turning the key and letting the Ferrari's engine roar to life. The sound was magnificent. Pure power wrapped in Italian engineering, announcing itself to the world with the confidence of something that had never needed to apologize for existing. And that's when Patricia fainted. She went down like a sack of potatoes, right there beside the pool, her carefully styled hair fanning out on the concrete as her brain tried to process what it was seeing. Jennifer screamed and ran to her mother, while Robert just stood there looking like someone had hit him with a baseball bat. Michael was still recording, but his phone was shaking so badly the video probably looked like it was shot during an earthquake. "Sarah," he said, his voice higher than usual, "what the fuck is going on?" I'd never heard Michael curse before. He was always so controlled, so superior. Hearing him lose his composure was almost as satisfying as the helicopter delivery. David was backing away from the car like it might bite him. "This is impossible," he kept saying. "This is impossible. We don't have this kind of money. We can't afford." "We can't," I agreed, stepping out of the Ferrari and closing the door with a satisfying thunk. "But I can." The words hit him like a physical blow. I watched the color drain from his face as he started to understand the implications of what he was seeing. "I don't understand," he whispered. "I know you don't," I said, and for the first time in 8 years, I wasn't trying to make him feel better about his confusion. Jennifer was fanning Patricia with a dinner napkin, trying to bring her around. When her mother's eyes finally fluttered open, the first thing she saw was me standing beside a Ferrari, and she nearly passed out again. "How?" she gasped, struggling to sit up. "How is this possible?" This was the question I'd been waiting 8 years to answer. The question that would finally explain why I'd let them treat me like garbage for so long, why I'd hidden in plain sight while they made jokes about my inadequacy. "Well," I said, leaning against my $250,000 car like it was the most natural thing in the world, "it turns out I'm pretty good with numbers." The understatement of the century, delivered with a smile that felt like the first genuine expression I'd worn in their presence since my wedding day. Robert was slowly walking toward the Ferrari, reaching out to touch it like he needed to confirm it was real. "This is a 488 GTB, he said, his voice full of the kind of reverence he usually reserved for talking about his classic car collection. This costs. "About 270,000, I said helpfully. "Before options. This one's closer to 300, fully loaded." $300,000, he repeated, and I could see him trying to do the math in his head, trying to figure out how his failure of a daughter-in-law could possibly be standing next to a car that cost more than his house. David was still staring at me like I'd grown a second head. "Where did this money come from, Sarah? Did you steal it? Did you?" "I earned it," I said simply. "Every penny." And that's when I decided it was time to tell them the truth. All of it. Everything I'd been hiding for 8 years while they treated me like their resident charity case. "You want to know how I afforded this car?" I asked, looking around the circle of confused, frightened faces. "Let me tell you about Webb Mitchell Crypto Solutions." The name meant nothing to them, of course. They had no idea that their poor, unemployable Sarah was the co-founder and CEO of one of the most successful cryptocurrency trading firms in the Southeast. They had no idea that while they'd been making jokes about my job searches, I'd been managing portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They had no idea that the woman they'd been treating like a burden was actually richer than all of them combined. But they were about to find out. The revelation came out in pieces, like a dam breaking one crack at a time, until the whole structure of their assumptions about me collapsed in a rushing flood of reality they couldn't ignore. "Webb Mitchell Crypto Solutions," I repeated, enjoying the blank looks on their faces. "We manage over $300 million in cryptocurrency assets for clients across Georgia, Tennessee, and South Carolina." Patricia was sitting on the ground beside the pool, still looking dazed from her fainting spell. "Crypto what?" she asked weakly. Cryptocurrency, I said patiently, the way you might explain something to a child. Digital currency. Bitcoin, Ethereum, blockchain technology. The future of finance that you've all been too traditional to understand. Michael's phone was still recording, but now he was holding it steady, like he knew he was documenting something historic. You're saying you work in cryptocurrency? I don't work in cryptocurrency, I corrected him. I run one of the most successful cryptocurrency trading firms in the Southeast. I co-founded it 6 years ago with my business partner, Marcus Webb. The name Marcus Webb meant nothing to them, but it should have. Marcus was featured on the cover of Forbes last year as one of the top blockchain innovators under 40. Our company had been profiled in TechCrunch, Wall Street Journal, and Bloomberg. We'd been invited to speak at conferences in New York, London, and Tokyo. But they wouldn't know any of that, because they'd never bothered to ask what I actually did with my time. That's impossible, David said, shaking his head. You don't have a job. You've been unemployed for years. I've been self-employed for years, I corrected. There's a difference. Jennifer was helping Patricia to her feet, both of them staring at me like I'd just revealed I was an alien. But Sarah, Jennifer said, her voice shaking slightly, you take the bus everywhere. You shop at thrift stores. You live in that tiny apartment. Because I chose to, I said simply. Because it was easier to let you all believe what you wanted to believe than to deal with your reactions to the truth. The truth. God, it felt good to finally say it out loud. Every morning when you thought I was going for a jog, I was actually going to my office. It's in a storage facility across town, not glamorous, but it kept me invisible. Every time you made jokes about my job hunting, I was actually in client meetings. Every time you assumed I was too stupid to contribute to conversations about money, I was making more in a day than most of you make in a month. Robert was walking around the Ferrari now, examining it like a crime scene investigator looking for clues. This is a factory fresh 488 GTB, he said, running his hand along the pristine paint. The waiting list for these is 18 months. Unless you know the right people, I said. Money has a way of shortening waiting lists. How much money are we talking about? Michael asked, and for the first time since I'd known him, there was no condescension in his voice. Just shock and something that might have been respect. I looked around at their faces, David's confusion, Patricia's horror, Jennifer's disbelief, Robert's growing understanding, Michael's grudging amazement, and I made a decision that I'd been avoiding for 8 years. I was going to tell them everything. My personal net worth is currently sitting at about $23 million, I said, watching their faces as the number hit them like a physical blow. The company is valued at just over $60 million. We've got clients who trust us with portfolios worth more than some small country's GDP. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the helicopter's rotors in the distance as it headed back to the private airfield where I kept my other toys. $23 million. I watched that number settle into their consciousness like a stone dropping into still water, sending ripples of realization across everything they thought they knew about their family dynamics. David sat down heavily in one of the deck chairs, his beer forgotten in his hand. 23 million, he repeated, like the words were in a foreign language. Give or take, I said. It fluctuates with the market. But how? Patricia asked, and her voice was so small I almost felt sorry for her. How is this possible? You've been living like what, Patricia? I asked, and there was no politeness in my voice anymore. Like someone who couldn't afford better? Like someone who wasn't good enough for your precious son? Like the charity case you've been tolerating for 8 years? She flinched like I'd slapped her. That was the point, I continued. All of it. The cheap clothes, the public transportation, the modest apartment, the job-hunting charade. I maintained that lifestyle because it was easier than dealing with your judgment about who I really am. Who you really are, Robert repeated slowly, and I could see him processing the implications. You've been lying to us. For 8 years, you've been lying to our faces. I've been protecting myself, I shot back. From exactly this kind of reaction. Look at you all right now. You can barely handle the truth. Imagine if I'd told you on day one that I was richer than all of you combined. Imagine how that would have gone over at Sunday dinner. You could have told me, David said quietly, and when I looked at him, I saw something I hadn't seen in years, uncertainty. My husband, who'd spent 8 years treating me like his burden, was suddenly realizing he didn't know his wife at all. Could I asked. Really? When's the last time you asked me about my goals, David? When's the last time you treated my opinions about anything as worth considering? When's the last time you defended me when your family made jokes at my expense? He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. We both knew the truth. Last night, I continued, when you laughed with them about how I couldn't even afford to buy a car, that was the last straw. 8 years of pretending to be grateful for your tolerance, 8 years of letting you all treat me like I was lucky to be included, 8 years of watching you be embarrassed by me in public. I was done. Sarah, Jennifer said, her voice carefully controlled, this changes things. Obviously. But you have to understand how confusing this is for us. We thought we knew you. You never tried to know me, I said. Any of you. You decided who I was the day David brought me home, and you never bothered to look deeper. The truth was a knife now, cutting through years of pretense and false smiles. I sat in this backyard dozens of times listening to you make jokes about my inadequacy. I smiled through conversations about how David deserved better, about how I wasn't contributing anything to his life, about how I needed to be more realistic about my place in your family. My voice was getting stronger now, 8 years of suppressed anger finally finding its outlet. Do you know what it's like to sit quietly while people you're supposed to love treat you like garbage? Do you know what it's like to pretend you're grateful for scraps while you're actually capable of buying and selling everything they think makes them special? Michael was still recording, but now he looked like he wished he could disappear. Sarah, we didn't know. You didn't want to know, I interrupted. It was easier to assume I was exactly what I appeared to be. Poor little Sarah from the trailer park, so grateful to have married up, so eager to please, so willing to accept whatever treatment you decided I deserved. The helicopter was completely gone now, just a memory in the distance, but the Ferrari sat there like a red exclamation point in the middle of their perfect lawn, impossible to ignore or explain away. So what happens now? Robert asked, and for the first time since I'd known him, he sounded uncertain. Now, I said, pulling out my phone, not the cheap Android they thought was my only option, but the latest iPhone that Marcus had insisted I upgrade to for security reasons. You get to watch me make a phone call that's going to change David's life. I dialed a number they didn't recognize, put the phone on speaker, and waited for the familiar voice to answer. Sarah. Marcus's voice was warm and professional. How did it go? Perfectly, I said, smiling at my husband's confused face. Are you ready for phase 2? Standing by, he confirmed. I looked directly at David as I said the words that would finally show him exactly what he'd thrown away with his cruelty and neglect. Initiate the trust fund. The confusion on David's face was almost comical as Marcus's voice came through the speaker, clear and businesslike. Trust fund initiated. The David Henderson Financial Independence Trust is now active with an initial deposit of $2.5 million. You could have heard a pin drop in that backyard. David's beer slipped from his hand and shattered on the concrete, but he didn't even notice. He was staring at my phone like it had just announced he'd won the lottery, which, in a way, it had. What did you just say? He whispered. $2.5 million, Marcus repeated patiently. Invested in a diversified portfolio of cryptocurrency and traditional assets, with projected annual returns of approximately 8 to 12%. The trust documentation is being filed with your attorneys as we speak. Patricia made a small choking sound. Jennifer grabbed the nearest chair for support. Michael's phone was shaking so badly I was surprised he was still recording. But it was Robert's face that caught my attention. He was looking at me with something I'd never seen from him before, fear. Robert Henderson, who'd spent 8 years treating me like dirt beneath his shoes, was finally realizing exactly what kind of enemy he'd made. "I don't understand," David said, his voice cracking. "Sarah, what is this?" I ended the call with Marcus and slipped the phone back into my purse. "It's exactly what it sounds like, David. I just gave you more money than your father has ever had in his entire life." The math was brutal and everyone knew it. Robert's 3 dealerships, combined with Patricia's family money and their real estate holdings, might have totaled $4 million on their best day. I'd just handed their unemployed son more than half that amount in a single phone call. "But why?" David asked, and the confusion in his voice was so genuine it almost broke my heart. Almost. "Because despite everything, despite 8 years of you letting your family treat me like garbage, despite you being embarrassed by me, despite you making jokes about my poverty last night, you're still my husband. And I still remember the man I fell in love with." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire they couldn't put out. "When we got married," I continued, "I promised to love you in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer. Turns out we skipped right past poorer and went straight to richer. But that promise still means something to me, even if our marriage doesn't seem to mean much to you anymore." David was crying now, actual tears streaming down his face as the full weight of what I'd just done hit him. "Sarah, I don't know what to say." "You could start with an apology," I suggested. 8 years' worth, actually. Jennifer had recovered enough to find her voice, though it was shaky. "Sarah, this is incredible, but surely you understand why we're all in shock. You've been deceiving us for years." "Have I?" I asked, turning to face her directly. "Or have I been protecting myself from people who made it clear that they'd rather judge me than know me?" The accusation hit its mark. Jennifer's perfectly composed face cracked slightly as she processed the implication. "Think about it," I continued. "What would have happened if I'd told you the truth on day one? If David had brought home his girlfriend from the trailer park and announced that she was secretly a multimillionaire? How would you have reacted to that?" The silence stretched out as they considered the question they'd probably never ask themselves. "You would have assumed I was lying," I said, answering for them. "Or you would have assumed I'd gotten the money illegally. Or you would have decided I was some kind of gold digger trying to infiltrate your family for your money, which would have been ironic, considering I had more than all of you combined." Patricia was still sitting in her chair, fanning herself with her napkin. "But Sarah, honey, you have to understand how this looks from our perspective. We've been trying to help you all these years." "Help me?" The laugh that escaped my throat was sharp enough to cut glass. "Patricia, in what universe have you been helping me? By making jokes about my clothes? By suggesting I wasn't good enough for your son? By treating me like a charity case at every family gathering?" "We thought," she started. "You thought I was beneath you," I interrupted. "All of you. You thought David had married down, and you spent 8 years trying to make both of us feel bad about it." Michael finally lowered his phone, the reality of what he'd been recording starting to sink in. "Jesus, Sarah, if we'd known." "If you'd known, you would have treated me differently," I agreed. "But why should money change how you treat people? Why should someone's bank account determine whether they deserve basic respect?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, which I suppose it was. "I watched you all for 8 years," I continued. "I studied how you interacted with people you thought were worth your time versus people you thought were beneath you. Do you know what I learned?" None of them answered, but I could see from their faces that they were afraid to find out. "I learned that you're all basically decent people who've been corrupted by your assumptions about class and worth. You're not evil, you're just lazy. It was easier to write me off as poor white trash than to actually get to know the person your son married." David was still crying, wiping his nose with the back of his hand like a child. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. I don't know how to fix this." The profanity was unlike him. David rarely cursed, especially not in front of his mother, but I could see that the shock of the last hour had stripped away all his careful composure. "I don't know if you can fix it," I said honestly. 8 years is a long time to let someone treat your wife like garbage. 8 years is a long time to be embarrassed by the person you promised to love and honor. But the money, he started. The money doesn't fix anything, I cut him off. The trust fund isn't a reward, David. It's a severance package. The words hit him like a physical blow. He actually staggered backward, nearly falling over the lawn chair behind him. What do you mean? He whispered. I walked back to the Ferrari, running my hand along its pristine surface. The metal was warm from the afternoon sun, solid and real and mine in a way that nothing in this backyard had ever been mine. I mean I'm done, I said simply. I'm done pretending to be someone I'm not. I'm done letting people treat me like I should be grateful for scraps. I'm done being married to a man who's ashamed of me. Sarah, no, Patricia said, struggling to her feet. Please, let's talk about this. We can work through this misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? I turned to look at her, this woman who'd spent 8 years making me feel like an intruder in her son's life. Patricia, there's no misunderstanding here. You all made your feelings about me crystal clear. The only thing that's changed is that now you know exactly who you've been insulting all these years. But family, she started. Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated me, I said. Family doesn't make jokes at each other's expense. Family doesn't spend 8 years trying to convince someone they're not good enough. I opened the Ferrari's door and settled into the driver's seat, feeling the Italian leather conform to my body like it was made for me. Which, technically, it was. The trust fund will make David financially independent, I said, starting the engine and letting it purr to life. He'll never have to work for his father again, never have to live down to your expectations again, never have to pretend his wife is holding him back. Sarah, please, David said, approaching the car with his hands out like he was trying to calm a wild animal. Don't do this. We can fix this. I can fix this. I looked at him through the open window, this man I'd loved for 10 years, married for 8, and who'd never once stood up for me when it mattered. Some things can't be fixed, David, I said. Some things are just broken. And with that, I put the Ferrari in gear and drove away from the Henderson family barbecue, leaving them standing in their backyard with their assumptions in ruins and their worldview shattered beyond repair. If you've ever been in a relationship where people made you feel small, if you've ever had to choose between being yourself and keeping the peace, you know why I drove away that day. And if this story is hitting close to home for you, please like and subscribe, because we're just getting to the part where I discovered that revenge is a dish best served with Italian engineering. The Ferrari handled like a dream as I wound through the back roads of Georgia, the V8 engine singing behind me as I put distance between myself and the wreckage I'd left in the Henderson backyard. For the first time in 8 years, I was driving away from a family gathering with my head held high instead of my heart breaking. My phone was buzzing constantly, David calling, Patricia calling, even Michael calling, but I let them all go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to hear their apologies or their explanations or their promises that things would be different now. 8 years of conditioning doesn't disappear in an afternoon, no matter how dramatic the revelation. I drove toward downtown Atlanta, letting muscle memory guide me while my mind processed what I'd just done. In the space of an hour, I'd revealed my secret identity, given my husband more money than he'd ever dreamed of, and ended my marriage in front of his entire family. It should have felt catastrophic, but instead, it felt like the first deep breath I'd taken in years. The storage facility that had housed my secret life for 3 years came into view, and I pulled into the parking lot without really deciding to go there. This place had been my sanctuary, my cave where I could be Sarah Mitchell instead of Sarah Henderson, where I could run a multi-million-dollar business instead of pretending to hunt for retail jobs. I parked the Ferrari next to my storage unit and sat there for a moment, engine off, listening to the metal tick as it cooled. Through the windshield, I could see Unit 47B, where I'd built an empire while my husband's family made jokes about my inadequacy. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Marcus. "How are you holding up?" he asked when I answered. "I'm sitting in the parking lot of our old office," I said, trying to figure out what happens next. "Any regrets?" I considered the question seriously. Did I regret revealing the truth? Did I regret the way I'd done it? Did I regret the nuclear option of the helicopter and the Ferrari and the trust fund? No, I said finally. I regret waiting so long to do it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, I think you handled it perfectly. 8 years is a long time to let people treat you like shit. Marcus was the only person who really understood what those 8 years had cost me. He'd been there for the late-night phone calls when I'd cried about another family dinner gone wrong. He'd listened to me vent about David's refusal to defend me, about Patricia's constant digs, about the soul-crushing weight of pretending to be grateful for tolerance. The trust fund was a nice touch, he continued. Very dramatic. Very final. I wanted to make sure David understood that this wasn't about the money, I said. If it were about money, I would have left him broke. This is about respect. About being seen. About finally refusing to accept treatment that I never deserved. So what's the plan now? I assume you're not going back to that apartment. The apartment. God, I hadn't even thought about the apartment. David and I had lived in that cramped 2-bedroom rental for 6 years, maintaining the fiction that we couldn't afford anything better. The lease was in both our names, but the deposit had come from my crypto earnings. Practically everything we owned had been paid for with money his family thought I didn't have. I think, I said slowly, it's time to buy a house. A real house. Something that screams I am not poor and I never was. Any preferences for location? I thought about that. Did I want to stay in Georgia, where I'd have to constantly run into the Henderson family and their social circle? Did I want to move somewhere new, start fresh, build a life that had nothing to do with the woman I pretended to be for 8 years? Somewhere with a view, I said finally. Somewhere high enough that I can look down on all the people who thought they were looking down on me. Marcus laughed. I know just the place. There's a penthouse in Buckhead that went on the market last week. 4 to 2nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, views of the entire city. The asking price is probably more than the Henderson family's net worth combined. Buckhead. The most exclusive neighborhood in Atlanta, where Jennifer lived with her doctor husband in their suburban mansion. Where the old money families had their charity galas and country club memberships and quiet understanding that some people simply didn't belong. Send me the listing, I said. Sarah, Marcus said, and his voice was gentle. Are you sure about this? Buying a 4 to 2nd floor penthouse in Buckhead feels less like moving on and more like declaring war. Maybe that's exactly what I'm doing, I said. Maybe I'm tired of hiding. Maybe I'm ready to let everyone know exactly who Sarah Mitchell really is. Sarah Mitchell. Not Sarah Henderson, not the poor girl from the trailer park who'd married above her station, but Sarah Mitchell, CEO and co-founder of Webb Mitchell Crypto Solutions. The woman who'd built an empire while everyone else was making jokes about her inadequacy. In that case, Marcus said, I'll call the realtor now. How soon do you want to see it? Today, I said without hesitation. I want to see it today. After I hung up with Marcus, I sat in the parking lot for another few minutes, watching the sun sink lower in the Georgia sky. My phone showed 17 missed calls from David, 12 from Patricia, and even a few from numbers I didn't recognize, probably Michael and Jennifer working up the courage to call. I opened David's voicemails first, because masochism is apparently one of my character flaws. Sarah, please call me back. I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry about everything. I know I screwed up. I know we all screwed up, but please don't do this. Please don't end our marriage over this. I love you. I've always loved you. I was just stupid. Please call me back. His voice was broken, desperate in a way I'd never heard before. For 8 years, David had been comfortable in his role as the disappointed husband whose wife wasn't living up to his family's expectations. Now, suddenly, he was the failure who'd been too stupid to realize he'd married a millionaire. The second voicemail was longer, more rambling. I keep thinking about all the times I should have defended you and didn't. All the times I let them make jokes and I just sat there like a coward. I keep thinking about how you must have felt, sitting there knowing you could buy and sell all of us, listening to us treat you like garbage. God, Sarah, How did you stand it? How did you not hate us all? How did I not hate them all? That was a good question. Maybe I did hate them, and I'd just been too well trained to admit it to myself. The third voicemail was different. Quieter. I found the papers for the trust fund on our kitchen table. $2.5 million. Sarah. You gave me $2.5 million after I spent the night laughing about how poor you were. I don't understand why you did that. I don't understand any of this. But I know I don't deserve it. I know I don't deserve you. I probably never did. Patricia's voicemails were what I expected, a mixture of apologies and attempts to control the narrative. She was sorry for the misunderstanding, sorry that I'd felt unwelcome, sorry that there had been communication issues in the family. Not sorry for 8 years of cruelty, not sorry for treating me like dirt, just sorry for the misunderstanding. Even in crisis, Patricia couldn't admit she'd been wrong. She could only admit there had been a breakdown in communication, as if the problem was that I'd misunderstood her kindness rather than that she'd been systematically cruel to me for nearly a decade. Michael's single voicemail was the most honest. Sarah, I owe you an apology. A big one. I've been a complete asshole to you for 8 years, and I didn't even realize how much of an asshole until today. I don't know if you'll ever forgive any of us, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Really sorry. And also, that thing you built, that business? That's fucking incredible. I'm actually kind of in awe of what you accomplished. In awe of what I accomplished. 8 years too late, but at least it was honest. I deleted all the voicemails without responding to any of them. Whatever happened next, it would happen on my terms, in my time, when I was ready to deal with the mess I'd left behind. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Penthouse viewing scheduled for 6 p.m. Fair warning, the asking price is $4.2 million. $4.2 million for a penthouse apartment. More than the Henderson family's entire net worth, as Marcus had predicted. The kind of money that announced to the world that you'd arrived, that you belonged in spaces where most people only dreamed of visiting. Perfect. I started the Ferrari and pulled out of the storage facility parking lot, heading toward Buckhead and toward a future that had nothing to do with the woman I'd pretended to be for 8 years. For the first time since my wedding day, I was excited about what came next. The Buckhead penthouse was everything Marcus had promised and more. 42 floors above Atlanta, with floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the entire city into my personal view. Standing in that empty space, looking out at the lights beginning to twinkle as evening fell, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of possibilities unlimited by other people's expectations. The previous owner was Tech Money, the realtor, Linda, explained as we walked through rooms that were larger than the entire apartment I'd shared with David. Sold his company to Google and decided to relocate to Silicon Valley. He's motivated to close quickly. Tech Money. I liked the sound of that. Not old money like the Henderson family pretended to be, not inherited wealth that came with rules and expectations and social obligations. Tech money was new money, smart money, money that had been earned rather than inherited. Money like mine. The master suite has a private balcony, Linda continued, opening double doors to reveal a bedroom that was bigger than some people's entire homes. The balcony beyond was a wraparound terrace with space for entertaining, with views that stretched from downtown Atlanta to the distant mountains. I walked to the edge of the terrace and looked down at the city below. Somewhere down there, David was probably still sitting in his parents' backyard, trying to process the revelation that had turned his life upside down. Somewhere down there, Patricia was probably calling her friends to figure out how to spin this story at the country club. Somewhere down there, the Henderson family was dealing with the reality that their poorest member had just revealed herself to be their richest. I'll take it, I said, turning back to Linda. She blinked, clearly taken aback by the speed of my decision. Don't you want to see the rest of the unit? There's a chef's kitchen, a library, a home office with smart glass that can be programmed for privacy. I'll take it, I repeated. Full asking price, cash offer, close in 2 weeks. Linda's professional composure cracked slightly. Ms. Mitchell, I have to ask, are you sure about the financing? $4.2 million in cash is. I pulled out my phone and showed her my banking app. The balance displayed was more than enough to buy the penthouse twice over. "Oh," she said quietly. "Oh my. I assume that won't be a problem." "No," she said quickly. "No problem at all. I'll draw up the paperwork immediately." As Linda made phone calls to lawyers and mortgage brokers who wouldn't be needed, I walked through my new home alone. The kitchen was a masterpiece of Italian marble and German engineering. The library had built-in shelves that reached from floor to ceiling. The home office had enough space for multiple workstations and a conference table for when Marcus and I needed to meet with clients. This wasn't just a home, it was a statement. A 42nd floor middle finger to everyone who'd ever treated me like I didn't belong in their world. My phone rang as I was standing in what would become my new bedroom, looking out at the city lights. David's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time all day, I answered. "Where are you?" he asked immediately, his voice strained. "I've been calling for hours." "I'm buying a house," I said simply. "A house? Sarah, can we please talk? Please? I know I fucked up, I know we all fucked up, but please don't make any major decisions while you're angry." "I'm not angry anymore," I said, and I realized it was true. The rage that had been building for 8 years had burned itself out sometime between the helicopter delivery and the penthouse viewing. What remained was something colder and more final: resolution. "Then come home," he pleaded. "Come back to the apartment. We can talk this through. I can change, Sarah. I can be better." "I am home," I said, looking out at the view that would greet me every morning for the rest of my life. "Or I will be in 2 weeks, when the papers are signed." "What are you talking about? What house?" "A penthouse in Buckhead. 42nd floor. $4.2 million. Cash. I think your sister lives somewhere in the neighborhood, actually. Maybe we'll be neighbors." The silence on the other end of the line was so complete I thought the call had dropped. "David." $4.2 million, he repeated slowly. "You spent $4.2 million on a house. Today. While our marriage was falling apart." "Our marriage fell apart years ago," I said gently. "Today I just stopped pretending otherwise." "Sarah, please. The money doesn't matter. None of it matters. I love you. I've always loved you, even when I was too stupid to show it properly." I sat down in one of the window seats, watching traffic move through the city below like blood cells through arteries. "Do you know what love looks like, David?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, if someone asked you to describe what it looks like when someone loves you, what would you say?" He was quiet for a moment. I don't know. Caring about someone? Being there for them. Love looks like defense," I said. "When someone attacks the person you love, you defend them. When someone makes jokes at their expense, you shut it down. When someone treats them badly, you don't allow it to continue." "Sarah." "For 8 years, I watched you sit quietly while your family made jokes about my poverty, my clothes, my job prospects, my worth as a human being. For 8 years, I watched you nod along when they suggested I wasn't good enough for you. For 8 years, I waited for you to stand up for me, just once." My voice was steady, which surprised me. I'd expected tears, anger, emotion. Instead, I felt the calm that comes with finally speaking a truth you've been avoiding. "I know," he said, and his voice was broken. "I know I failed you. I was weak and I was stupid and I let them treat you terribly because it was easier than standing up to them. But I can change, Sarah. I can be the husband you deserve." "You're 29 years old," I said. "If you were going to become the kind of man who defends his wife, it would have happened by now." "That's not fair." "Fair." I laughed, and there was no humor in it. "David, nothing about the last 8 years has been fair. But fairness isn't the point anymore. The point is that I'm done accepting treatment I don't deserve from people who should love me." "I do love you." "Maybe you do," I conceded. "But you love your family's approval more." You love keeping the peace more. You love avoiding conflict more. And I'm tired of competing with all those things for scraps of respect from my own husband. Linda appeared in the doorway, holding a folder full of paperwork. I held up one finger to indicate I needed another minute. The trust fund, David said suddenly. Why did you give me the money if you're leaving me? Because despite everything, I don't want to see you fail, I said. The money will give you independence from your father's business, from your family's expectations. Maybe without all that pressure, you'll figure out who you actually are instead of who you think they want you to be. I want to be your husband. You had 8 years to be my husband, I said. Instead, you chose to be their son. Sarah. I have to go, I said, standing up as Linda approached with the contracts. I'm signing papers on my new home. Don't do this, he said, and there was panic in his voice now. Please don't do this. I'll do anything. I'll cut my family off completely if that's what it takes. I'll never speak to them again. It's too late for grand gestures, David, I said sadly. 8 years too late. I hung up and turned to Linda, who was pretending she hadn't overheard every word of my conversation. Ready to make this official? She asked. I took the pen she offered and signed my name on the first page. Sarah Mitchell. Not Henderson. Mitchell. The name I'd been born with, the name that belonged to the woman who'd built an empire while everyone else was making jokes. For the first time in 8 years, I was signing my real name on something that mattered. Welcome home, Ms. Mitchell, Linda said as I handed back the completed contracts. I looked around my new penthouse one more time, at the space that would be mine and mine alone, at the view that would remind me every day that I'd climbed higher than anyone who'd ever looked down on me. Thank you, I said. It's good to be home. 2 weeks later, I was standing in my new penthouse at 7 a.m., drinking coffee from a mug that cost more than David's monthly rent, watching the sunrise paint Atlanta gold through my floor-to-ceiling windows. The moving trucks had finished the day before, and for the first time in my adult life, I was living in a space that reflected who I actually was instead of who I'd been pretending to be. My phone had been mercifully quiet for the past few days. David had stopped calling after I'd had Marcus send the divorce papers to his apartment. Patricia had apparently given up trying to fix the misunderstanding after I'd ignored her 14th voicemail. Even Michael had stopped trying to reach me, though he'd sent a single text that simply said, "I'm sorry. You deserved better from all of us." The only family member I'd heard from recently was Jennifer, who'd left a voicemail the night before that was so perfectly Jennifer I'd actually laughed out loud listening to it. Sarah, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to reach out because I think there might be some opportunities for us to support each other now that we understand your situation better. I'm on the board of several charities that could really benefit from your expertise and resources. Maybe we could have lunch sometime and discuss how you might want to get involved in the community. I think you'd find it very fulfilling. Even facing the complete destruction of her worldview about me, Jennifer couldn't help but try to manage and control the situation. She'd gone from thinking I was trailer park trash to seeing me as a potential donor to her pet charities, and somehow she thought this was an improvement in our relationship. I'd deleted the voicemail without responding. If Jennifer wanted to rebuild a relationship with me, it was going to have to start with acknowledging 8 years of cruelty, not with invitations to donate to her favorite causes. The view from my new home office was spectacular. I could see for miles in every direction, and somewhere in the sprawl below me was the modest suburban neighborhood where Jennifer lived with her doctor husband. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now literally looking down on the woman who'd spent years looking down on me. Marcus arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, carrying 2 bags of pastries from the French bakery downstairs and wearing a grin that could power the building. "How does it feel to be officially divorced from the Henderson family?" he asked, setting the pastries on my new marble kitchen counter. "Like waking up from a nightmare I didn't realize I was having," I said honestly. The divorce papers had been surprisingly simple. Georgia's no-fault divorce laws meant I didn't have to prove David's emotional neglect or his family's cruelty. I just had to prove that our marriage was irretrievably broken, which wasn't exactly difficult given the circumstances. David had signed without contest, though according to my lawyer, he'd cried through the entire meeting. The trust fund I'd established for him meant he wouldn't contest any of the financial arrangements. Everything I'd earned before and during our marriage stayed with me, and he got to keep the apartment and the Honda Civic and $2.5 million he'd never earned. It was more generous than he deserved, but I'd kept my promise to myself that this wouldn't be about punishment. It would be about freedom. Any regrets? Marcus asked, echoing the question he'd posed 2 weeks earlier. About the divorce? None. About the way I handled the revelation? Also none. About the 8 years I wasted trying to make people love me who were never going to see my worth. I paused, considering. Maybe. But you can't change the past, and dwelling on it just keeps you trapped there. Marcus nodded, pulling out his laptop. Speaking of not being trapped in the past, we've got some business to discuss. The Forbes interview requests are piling up, and TechCrunch wants to do a feature on how we built the company. Apparently, your dramatic exit from suburban obscurity has made you something of a folk hero in the crypto community. I'd been avoiding the media attention, but Marcus was right. It was time to step out of the shadows completely. For 3 years, I'd been the anonymous co-founder of Webb Mitchell Crypto Solutions, letting Marcus handle all the public-facing aspects of our business. But if I was going to rebuild my life as Sarah Mitchell instead of Sarah Henderson, that meant embracing all aspects of my success, including the public ones. Set up the interviews, I said. All of them. It's time for Sarah Mitchell to tell her own story. What about the Henderson family? They're going to see everything, the interviews, the feature articles, the conference speaking engagements. Are you prepared for that level of exposure? I thought about Patricia, who'd spent 8 years making sure I knew I didn't belong in her social circle. I thought about Robert, who dismissed my opinions about business and finance while I was secretly out-earning him by millions. I thought about David, who'd been embarrassed to introduce me to his colleagues while I was building a company that would revolutionize how people thought about cryptocurrency. I'm counting on it, I said. We spent the morning reviewing business proposals and planning for the next phase of Webb Mitchell's expansion. We had clients waiting in California, New York, and London. We had venture capitalists interested in funding our new algorithmic trading platform. We had universities asking us to speak at their business schools about disruptive innovation in financial technology. For 8 years, I'd been hiding this life, compartmentalizing my success so thoroughly that even I sometimes forgot how far I'd come from that scared girl in the trailer park. But sitting in my penthouse office, looking out at a city I could now afford to buy a significant portion of, I felt the full weight of what I'd accomplished. I'd built something extraordinary while everyone around me thought I was failing. Around noon, my doorman called to announce I had a visitor. "A Mrs. Henderson is here to see you," he said. "Should I send her up?" Patricia. Of course it would be Patricia making the pilgrimage to my penthouse, probably with some combination of apology and attempt at manipulation prepared. "Send her up," I said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You sure about this?" "It's time," I said. "Besides, I'm curious to see how she plays this." Patricia arrived 10 minutes later, looking smaller than I remembered in the vast space of my new living room. She was perfectly dressed, as always, but there was something diminished about her presence here, surrounded by my success made visible. "Sarah," she said, and her voice had none of its usual authority. "Thank you for seeing me. Would you like coffee?" I offered, playing the gracious hostess in my own home. "Please." I poured her a cup from my Italian espresso machine, using one of the crystal cups that had cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. Patricia accepted it with hands that trembled slightly. "This is quite a place," she said, looking around at the art I'd collected over the past 2 weeks, the furniture that had been custom-made by craftsmen in Milan, the technology that turned my entire wall into a digital window capable of displaying anything from sunrise over the Pacific to the aurora borealis. "Thank you," I said simply. "I suppose I owe you an apology," she continued, settling into one of my leather chairs like she wasn't sure it would support her. "You suppose?" Patricia flinched at the sharpness in my voice, but she pressed on. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about the last 8 years, about the things we said and did, about the way we treated you. And I realize we made some mistakes." "Some mistakes?" 8 years of systematic cruelty reduced to some mistakes. What kind of mistakes? I asked. We misjudged you, she said carefully. We made assumptions about your background and your capabilities that were clearly wrong. What assumptions were those, Patricia? She shifted uncomfortably. We assumed that because you came from a different background, you might not be, that you wouldn't be able to. Say it, I said quietly. Say what you thought about me. We thought you were going to hold David back, she admitted. We thought you didn't have the education or the social skills to help him succeed. We thought he'd married beneath his station and that it would hurt his prospects. The honesty was startling, but it wasn't an apology. It was an explanation. And now? I asked. Now we realize we were wrong, she said. Obviously. Spectacularly wrong. But you're not sorry for thinking it, I observed. You're just sorry that you were wrong. Patricia's carefully composed expression cracked slightly. I don't understand the difference. The difference is that being wrong about my net worth doesn't change the fact that you spent 8 years treating me with contempt. The difference is that discovering I'm rich doesn't erase the cruelty you showed me when you thought I was poor. Sarah, please. Do you think poor people deserve to be treated the way you treated me? I asked. Do you think someone's bank account determines whether they deserve basic respect and kindness? She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup like it might contain the answer she was looking for. No, she said finally. No, I don't think that. Then why did you treat me that way? Because I was afraid, she said, and her voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear her. Afraid of what? Afraid that David would become like his father, she said. Robert was ambitious once. He had dreams, plans, goals. But he got comfortable, and he got lazy, and he settled for running car dealerships instead of building something bigger. I was afraid that if David married someone who didn't push him, someone who didn't expect excellence, he'd settle for mediocrity too. It was the most honest thing Patricia had ever said to me, and it was still fundamentally insulting. So you decided to make my life miserable in the hope that it would motivate your son to succeed. I thought if we made it clear that you weren't enough, David would work harder to prove himself worthy of something better. Instead, he decided I wasn't enough and gave up trying altogether, I pointed out. Your plan backfired spectacularly. Patricia nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. I know. I see that now. David's been living in that trust fund apartment for 2 weeks, drinking too much and talking about how he doesn't deserve the money you gave him. He's more lost than ever. Part of me felt sorry for David, but it was a small part. He'd had 8 years to figure out how to be a good husband, and he'd chosen to be a dutiful son instead. I can't fix David, I said. That was never my job, even though you all seem to think it was. I know, Patricia said. I know that now. I'm not here to ask you to fix him. I'm here to ask you to forgive me. The request hung in the air between us like a bridge neither of us was sure would hold our weight. I can forgive you, I said finally. But I can't forget. And I can't pretend the last 8 years didn't happen just because you're sorry now. I understand, she said. I don't expect us to be family again. I needed you to know that I'm sorry. Really sorry. Not just sorry that we were wrong about you, but sorry for the pain we caused you. It wasn't enough, but it was something. It was more than I'd gotten from David, more than I'd expected from any of them. Thank you, I said. I appreciate you saying that. Patricia finished her coffee and stood to leave, pausing at the window to look out at the city below. You did it, she said quietly. You built something extraordinary. You became someone extraordinary. Despite everything we put you through, you succeeded beyond anything any of us ever imagined. I succeeded because of what you put me through, I corrected. Every insult, every slight, every moment of dismissal taught me that I couldn't depend on anyone else's validation. It taught me that the only approval that matters is my own. She nodded. understanding finally dawning in her eyes. "That's a hard way to learn that lesson," she said. "But it's a lesson that sticks," I replied. After Patricia left, I stood at my window looking out at the city I'd conquered through sheer determination and mathematical genius. Somewhere down there, David was probably drinking away his guilt in an apartment paid for by my success. Somewhere down there, Jennifer was probably planning her next approach to recruit me for her charities. Somewhere down there, the Henderson family was learning to live with the reality that the woman they'd underestimated had surpassed them all. But I wasn't looking down with anger anymore. I wasn't looking down with a need for revenge. I was looking down with the satisfaction of someone who'd climbed higher than the people who tried to keep her small, and who'd done it without losing her soul in the process. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been written off, if you've ever had people assume they knew your worth based on appearances, this story is for you. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. Sometimes it's simply becoming so successful that their opinions become irrelevant. And sometimes, the greatest victory is realizing you don't need their validation anymore, because you've learned to validate yourself. 6 months after the helicopter landed in the Henderson backyard, I was standing on a stage at the Crypto Innovation Conference in New York, looking out at an audience of 3,000 entrepreneurs, investors, and tech leaders who hung on every word I said about blockchain technology and market analysis. My presentation was titled Hidden in Plain Sight: Building Wealth While the World Isn't Watching, and it had become one of the most requested speaking topics in the industry. People wanted to know how I'd built a multi-million-dollar company while living in apparent poverty, how I'd managed to fly under the radar for so long, and what lessons other entrepreneurs could learn from my unconventional path to success. But what they really wanted to know, what every interviewer asked and every audience member was curious about, was the story behind the Ferrari and the helicopter and the family that had underestimated me so catastrophically. I'd become something of a legend in the cryptocurrency world, the mystery woman who'd revealed herself in the most dramatic way possible, the CEO who'd hidden her success for 8 years while building an empire in secret. Forbes had put me on their cover with the headline "The Invisible Billionaire." TechCrunch had profiled me as the woman who redefined stealth mode. My net worth had tripled since going public with my identity. Clients wanted to work with the woman who'd built wealth while everyone thought she was broke. Investors wanted to back someone with that level of strategic thinking and long-term planning. Speaking fees alone were bringing in more money than David's trust fund every month. But the real transformation wasn't financial, it was personal. For the first time in my adult life, I was living as myself, completely and unapologetically. No hiding, no pretending, no shrinking myself down to fit into other people's expectations. The penthouse had become my fortress of solitude, but it was also my launching pad. I turned one bedroom into a home studio where I recorded a weekly podcast about cryptocurrency and financial independence. I'd converted the library into a meeting space where Marcus and I interviewed potential clients and planned our expansion into international markets. The walls were covered with awards and recognitions I'd never been able to display before: the Blockchain Innovation Award I'd won 2 years earlier under a pseudonym, the certificate from MIT where I'd guest lectured on algorithmic trading, the photo of me shaking hands with the Secretary of Treasury at a cryptocurrency regulation summit. For 8 years, these accomplishments had been hidden away in a storage unit. Now they were displayed prominently in my home, visible reminders of what I'd achieved while everyone thought I was achieving nothing. My phone rang as I was reviewing my notes for the next day's presentation. The caller ID made me pause. David Henderson. We'd spoken only once since the divorce was finalized, a brief and awkward conversation about dividing the few possessions we'd accumulated during our marriage. He'd kept the Honda Civic and the furniture from our apartment. I'd kept everything else, which turned out to be considerably more valuable than anyone had realized. "Hello, David," I said, answering on the 4th ring. "Sarah." His voice was different, quieter, more uncertain than I remembered. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "I'm preparing for a keynote speech tomorrow," I said. "But I have a few minutes." "A keynote speech? Of course you are." He was quiet for a moment. "I saw the Forbes cover. You looked incredible. Like the most successful version of yourself." "Thank you," I said, though I wasn't sure if he meant it as a compliment or an observation about how much I'd changed. I wanted to call because I've been thinking about what you said. About love looking like defense. About how I failed to protect you from my family all those years. I waited for him to continue, curious where this conversation was heading. I've been in therapy, he said. Trying to figure out why I was such a coward, why I let them treat you the way they did. And I think I understand now. What do you understand? I was afraid of them, he said simply. I've been afraid of disappointing my family my entire life. I was so focused on their approval that I couldn't see how much damage I was doing to the person who mattered most. It was a revelation that had come about 6 months too late, but I appreciated the honesty. How are you doing? I asked, because despite everything, I still cared about his well-being. Better, he said. The money you gave me. I used some of it to start my own business. A consulting firm for small family businesses. Nothing as impressive as what you built, but it's mine, you know? It's the first thing I've ever done that wasn't connected to my father's expectations. That's good, David. I'm glad you're finding your way. I'll never forgive myself for how I treated you, he said. For how I let them treat you. You deserved so much better than what you got from me. We both deserved better, I said. But we can't change the past. We can only learn from it. Have you learned anything? He asked. From all of this? I thought about that question as I looked around my penthouse, at the life I'd built from the ashes of my marriage, at the success I'd achieved by finally refusing to hide who I was. I learned that other people's opinions of me are none of my business, I said finally. I learned that waiting for validation from people who don't see your worth is a waste of time and energy. And I learned that the only approval I need is my own. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. I know I don't have the right to be proud, but I am. You became everything you were always meant to be. I became who I always was, I corrected. I just stopped hiding it. After we hung up, I stood at my window looking out at the city lights, thinking about the journey that had brought me to this place. 3 years ago, I'd been Sarah Henderson, the disappointing wife who couldn't even afford a car. Now I was Sarah Mitchell, CEO, keynote speaker, cover story, success beyond anyone's wildest expectations. But the most important transformation wasn't in my bank account or my business accolades or my Manhattan penthouse. It was in the way I saw myself, the way I moved through the world, the way I refused to accept treatment that didn't match my worth. I'd spent 8 years trying to earn love and acceptance from people who were never going to see my value. I'd shrunk myself down, hidden my light, pretended to be less than I was in the hope that it would make me more palatable to people who should have loved me unconditionally. The Ferrari landing in the Henderson backyard hadn't been about revenge, though that's how most people interpreted the story. It had been about revelation, about finally showing the world who I'd always been underneath the performance of poverty and inadequacy. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, sold out crowd tomorrow. Standing room only. Ready to tell your story to the biggest audience yet. I typed back, ready to tell the world that the only limitation on your success is your willingness to accept other people's limitations on your possibilities. Because that's what I'd learned in the end. Not that money matters, or that showing off is satisfying, or that revenge is sweet. I'd learned that the moment you stop waiting for permission to be extraordinary is the moment your extraordinary life begins. The girl from the trailer park was still inside me, but she wasn't ashamed anymore. The CEO worth millions was real, but she wasn't defined by her bank account. The woman who'd driven away from that family barbecue in a Ferrari had been all of those things at once, past and present, struggle and success, the journey and the destination. Tomorrow I'd tell 3,000 people about building wealth while the world wasn't watching. But tonight, I was just Sarah Mitchell, standing in her penthouse, finally comfortable in her own skin after a lifetime of trying to fit into other people's expectations. And that, more than any amount of money or professional accolades or viral revenge stories, felt like the greatest success of all. If you've made it this far in my story, if you've stayed with me through the pain and the revelation and the transformation, I want you to know something. Whatever limitations other people have placed on your possibilities, whatever boxes they've tried to put you in, whatever small version of yourself they've convinced you to accept, those aren't real. The only real limitation is the one you accept. The only validation that matters is the one you give yourself. And the only approval you need to build an extraordinary life is your own. Don't wait for permission to be brilliant. Don't wait for acceptance to be successful. Don't wait for understanding to be yourself, completely and unapologetically. Because sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving other people wrong, it's proving yourself right. Thanks for watching, and remember, your worth isn't determined by other people's ability to see it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be invisible anymore.